to be able to walk and live in these territories. WMRCC acknowledges the lands and the people of the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands we are situated on operate our businesses in Durham region are covered under the Williams Treaties and the traditional territories of the Mississauga, a branch of the Great Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Adawa, and Potawatomi. September 30th, 2021 marked the First Nation. September 30th, 2021 marked the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We stand with the Indigenous communities across Ontario and Canada as we honor the lost children and survivors of the residential schools, families and communities, including the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Back to you, Nyarai. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aissatou. And now I will hand over to Praise Akinkumi to go over our African Ancestry Declaration Statement. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'll be reading the International Decade for People of African Ancestry. The United Nations proclaimed 2015 to 2014 an International Decade for People of African Descent, recognizing that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected everywhere. In December 2014, the General Assembly adopted a second decade spanning from January 2025 to December 2034 to continue advancing these objectives. It is estimated that roughly 200 million people of African descent live in North America alone, with millions more worldwide. We observe a moment of silence to honor those Africans who have led lives of service, those who stood up for racial, social, and economic justice, have sacrificed to advance the well-being of African Canadians and all justice-loving people, have confronted and dismantled oppressive forces, practices, and institutions, and have built affirming and equitable examples to inspire us all. Our ancestors have acted with courage and conviction. They built communities and institutions. They changed the political, economic, cultural, and social landscape of these nations. Back to you, Narai.
Thank you so much. Truly appreciate your praise and Aissatou. Now, for those of you who may not know who we are the Women's Multicultural Resource and Counseling Center of Durham. We have been established for 32 years now. We are a registered charitable organization that is dedicated to providing trauma-informed care counseling services and programs to support women of all ages, youth and children from diverse backgrounds, gender diverse individuals, to eradicate violence, to rebuild their lives, and to enable them to becoming contributing members of the society. So we are here. We have so many programs that you can access for free. Outside of our trauma-informed care counseling, we do have projects like the Seniors Social Inclusion Program, where seniors come together for recreational activities in order to reduce feelings of isolation. And we also have our Age Well at Home program that supports seniors with house chores, grocery shopping. You can check out our website, wmrcc.org, for many other projects, including our Worker Cooperative Development Program that is also serving women to come together, create businesses in a cooperative form, just to help them advance their economic status as well. And then we also have our youth-related programs as well. So we have youth mentorship, we have youth psychotherapists, we have so much of a wide range of programs and services for free that are here to support women, youth, children, and gender diverse individuals with lived experiences of violence. So out of WMRCC comes Hair Power Project. So the Hair Power Project was created or established to be a 33-month systemic change project, which will help to advance women's economic security and prosperity through systemic change. So what this project will specifically focus on is to increase leadership and economic advancement opportunities for women with disabilities by improving employers' understanding and implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices. So how we're going to do this is that we are going to focus on 4 deliverables, which means that our number 1 deliverable is to conduct a needs assessment and gather data on the barriers faced by women with disabilities in Durham and the GTA. We have already sent out a call for research volunteers. If you are still interested, feel free to send me an email on nyerai.chidemo@wmrccdurham.org. I will be happy to put that in the chat. If you go to our Instagram, our handle is WMRCC Durham. You'll be able to see the post for call for research volunteers. Our second deliverable is to implement a networking and mentorship program designed to advance leadership opportunities for women with disabilities. We have established a Hair Power Mentorship Hub. Last Friday, we were able to hang out with some of our mentors and mentees as our first cohort was introduced. So we are excited because this is a space where women with disabilities are paired with other women who are successful in their careers to help them achieve their goals and even achieve the economic advancement opportunities and gaps that are so much around them, and trying to just close that gap to make sure that they become successful in their own right when they start their own business or whether they choose to go back to school, whatever their goals are. Our third deliverable is to establish a network of male allies through community dialogues and consultations. So keep looking, keep checking our statuses, because we are brewing something. We've already started talking to males in the community. So we will be having conversations. If you're a male watching this and you would like to be part of those dialogues, feel free to get in touch with us as well. And our fourth and final deliverable is to deliver inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility training that is informed by a feminist disability perspective to organizations in Durham and the GTA. Our most recent one that we had in Toronto was well received, and we are looking forward to having many more of those conversations. So that's a little bit about the project. And now I'm just going to quickly jump into what we're about to talk about today. And today, again, we are talking about navigating ableism and entrepreneurship, trying to figure out how women with disabilities are making it happen in spite of the challenges that are laid before them. And again, I will introduce to you again, Karoline and Farrah will have joined me today, who are women that are making change and impacting lives through their entrepreneurship journeys, and I'm happy to have them here today. So Karoline and Farrah, I would love to hear a bit more about your journeys in your own words. So what sparked your passion for entrepreneurship, and how has your lived experience shaped the path that you're on today? Any one of you can go.
I can
Who do you want to start?
Oh, Karoline, you go ahead. You go ahead.
You sure? Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Karoline, and I think the reason I became an entrepreneur is because, to be very honest, I did the job search thing and nothing seemed to fit. I wasn't getting callbacks. I am an accessibility advocate. I have been all of my life. I'm a guide dog user, and no matter what I did, I didn't seem to deserve callbacks from potential employers. Even though I have a JD, I have tons of different project experience, that didn't seem to make a difference. So I just decided to create it for myself. And after doing many, many hours of working with different coaches, leadership coaches and business coaches, we determined that I really love talking to people and I love presentations. I trained as a mediator and I now provide specialized training to different organizations. And I'm happy to say that I love my clients. I go to different not-for-profits so far and some bigger companies, and I talk to them about what they can do to make their workplace more accessible. Um, we talk about employment issues, being a good not-for-profit board. We've created programs about a variety of topics. So yeah, and I think I'm happiest when I am able to provide these services. So it's my story.
Thank you for sharing. Farrah, let's hear from you.
Sure. So my name is Farrah Seucharan. I'm a disability speaker, also a disability rights advocate and facilitator. And so I came into entrepreneurship mainly because for some of the same reasons that Caroline was speaking about. I was looking for jobs, and sometimes I would get jobs, but the problem came when I had to take time off for my appointments because I have lupus and other chronic illnesses. So the
Mhm,
problem was that I would, take the time off, say, I can make it up on the weekends or evenings, which I certainly would.
mhm,
But after a certain amount of time, employers tend to get tired of that. They tend to say they are, welcoming of people with disabilities, but sometimes in truth, it takes a lot of time for people to learn what welcoming actually means. And because of
mm,
that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to start my own business. I first started it when I entered a contest back in 2018 to launch a disability business that paired people with job coaches as well as with uh, people who could help them health wise. Unfortunately, that never really took off and it remained as a concept. But after a few years, I decided to become a disability speaker, and that's where I've really found success. So I used that failure that I initially had to be a jumping board to become a speaker. And that's my story.
Wow, phenomenal, phenomenal. And I applaud you both for being creative and innovating to make space for yourself. I think it was Shelley Chisholm that said, if they cannot make a seat at the table for you, like bring your own chair. I think there's a quote that Shelley said. And I always think about it that sometimes you may not have the opportunities where people are creating spaces for you to thrive. So hey, how about you create your own space, right? And then you are still both are doing great and amazing things. So let's dive into the heart of our conversations, and I will be guiding us through a series of thoughtful questions. So feel free to jump in, reflect, and just build on each other's insight as we get into this. So firstly, I want to speak about breaking stereotypes and stigma, because as we know that women with disabilities, they often face layered stereotypes, right? As women and also as people living with disabilities. I would like for each one of you to share, has there been a moment in your self-employment journey, in your entrepreneurship journey, where you had to confront or dismantle a stereotype that kind of tried to hold you back? How did you navigate it, and what did you take away from that experience? I'll go with you,
Why don't you
Caroline.
go ahead?
Yes.
All right. So I have had actually several occasions where this has happened. And it's almost unavoidable. I walk into a room, and no matter how much I do to be knowledgeable and to prepare, the first thing people see is the dog, right?
Mm,
So they automatically will start to talk around me, not to me. Um, they want to know about the dog, which is great, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So I've often had to build her into my introduction. So I basically have started saying, yeah, this is my guide dog, Raven. She doesn't exist. You can ignore her. If you feed her, you get to take her home because it will not be a good time. And I just like start with that, which then allows them to ask the questions and then we can get it off the table because I don't want it sitting there in the background.
Hmm.
And then the other piece that comes up a lot is, but how are you going to be able to deal with my documents, or how are you going to be able to communicate with my clients or whatever? And as long as documents are created properly, that isn't an issue. Um, so I basically go in with a can-do attitude, and I just try not to anticipate problems, knowing that they will arise.
Mhm.
Um, and basically, I try to problem solve before we get there. And sometimes, depending on the client and how things feel, because you go with your gut a lot with these things, you may want to talk about these things before you get there.
Hmm. I love what you said about introducing your guide dog Raven into the conversation. And that's very educational to people who pay attention because, and I like that you gave power back you took back your power. So instead of getting into a space and waiting for them to ask you these awkward questions, that could almost like make you frustrated or be like, I forget this. You were proactive in realizing that, every space I'm going, I'm taking up space. I'm going to take the power back in my own hands and introduce and incorporate Raven into the introduction. And I love that. I just wanted to say those are ways that we can truly take an example out of your page and make sure that every space we get, we are 10 steps ahead instead of waiting for people to ask us those weird conversations, having those weird conversations. So thank you for highlighting that. And I'm just curious with you, Farrah, because I know that in our preparation, you also mentioned some examples of stereotypes that you've had to overcome. Are you able to elaborate on them for now at this
Sure.
point?
Sure, absolutely. So I encountered a few stereotypes when throughout my entrepreneurship journey. We know what I'm talking about.
Yes, we do.
Yes. So I think one of the things is, of course, being a disabled woman. And I think there's sort of a very unfortunate hierarchy of disabled people.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes if you're visibly disabled, you're treated differently than if you're not visibly disabled. For me, I do not come across as visibly disabled. However, I have, my heart, lungs, certain functions just don't seem to work. And so it takes time for people to understand this, as I was mentioning in my last response. And because of that, I encounter a lot of stereotypes such as disabled people can't do X, Y, Z. Disabled people will bring an organization down.
Mhm.
Also, in terms of being a woman, I found that since I wanted to do that original concept that I was speaking about, I wanted to make an app that paired people with jobs and also health mentors. Because I wanted to do an app, I found that a lot of people I approached to fund me or to pay with me said, being a woman in
Mhm.
tech is extremely hard unless you're doing something, say fashion related or something like that. And I found that quite offensive. So I
Mhm.
think it depended who I spoke to. Some people were quite encouraging in the entrepreneurship field. But besides that, I found a lot of barriers when dealing with people who didn't see disabled people for who they really are. And that's what really created the barriers for me. I also felt that I wanted to create a new model of entrepreneurship in which I would be able to co-own an organization with somebody. And a lot of people were not open to that idea. because they thought, you know what, that can become quite messy. But the truth is, when you're a disabled person, oftentimes you lean on your community and you lean on other people. And I think that this is a new way forward that people can consider, is to have organizations, have any kind of business where there's several owners at once.
Hmm. You know, as I'm taking notes and I'm just thinking back to what Caroline just saying, what you're saying, I'm still so much of a parallel here. And the main point that stood out, and when you said dealing with people who didn't see disabled people for who they are. Can we talk a little bit more about that? I don't know, Caroline, if you want to tap into this at this time, but I'm just curious, can we just provide examples of what that looks like? We have the time. This is the moment to have this conversation.
Sure. So many times, and my favorite example I'll tell you about was in Jamaica, but there is a stereotype of what a blind person is supposed to be, apparently, and I'm glad to say I don't fit that. But we were on a tour in Jamaica. We had gone to a couple of beautiful tour sites, and the tour guide was chatting with my husband and I afterwards, and she said, "Oh, it's so brave or something that you're here." And I said, "No, it's amazing. I get to have like Blue Mountain coffee right off the mountain, and I was enjoying it." And my husband said to her, "Oh, but you know, that's kind of a sad thing to say because people with disabilities can do whatever they want." Um, and then he said, "And let me tell you, Caroline is a lawyer." And the woman just could not believe, like, how is this possible? Um, and I've come across that attitude in so many places, and it makes no sense because you know what? I went to school just like anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I had to study a lot harder than a lot of people,
Yeah,
just
indeed.
because, yeah, just because resources weren't always there to make life easier. Um, but I don't really think of like to me, I don't connect those things. I never think of myself as a disability first. I'm just me and I'm just doing the best I can to show up every day. Um, and Farrah, I don't know if it's that way for you, but a lot of times people have no idea who we are.
That is so true, Caroline. I find that it's very difficult for people to see the true me sometimes. I have moments where I feel that I'm coming across disability first, and that's okay. And I also have moments where I feel that it's in the background, and that's okay. Especially when I'm in my position as a DEI speaker, I feel like people are more curious about my disability, especially coming from an audience question perspective. And I'm very happy to answer questions on that. I want people to understand. But at the same time, I do not want people to feel sorry for me because, to be honest, I think that as disabled peoples, we juggle a lot of balls at once. For myself, I know that I already have a full-time job taking care of myself and handling all my illnesses. So to add another job on top of that, that's doing more than sometimes the average person will do in a day. And so I think that being seen as someone who you should feel sorry for is very disheartening, but at the same time, I'm here to
Mm-hmm.
educate.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, absolutely. And those that just flows to what we were talking about and what we probably all know, that ableism is often subtle, and yet very harmful, especially when paired with gender bias, majority of the time. So as somebody who works with gender equality, I already understand what women alone go through. And as somebody who came up with this project idea for WMRCC to have a niche in serving women with disabilities, it's often from that perspective because you do realize that at the intersection of gender and disability, whew, and try to have a business, that's a lot. Like you say, you already have a full-time job trying to take care of yourself, and then now having to navigate spaces that sees disability as almost like if you have a disability, you are incapable, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough. And I think, Karoline, one time you gave an example about a client refusing services. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because you had a disability. So I just want both of you, because I really want to stay in here, because we're talking about navigating spaces of business and entrepreneurship. I need each one of you to just highlight a moment where your abilities were underestimated due to your disability and gender. What was your response? And what advice would you give to someone in your situation?
Absolutely. So if I may, I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Of course. So I think that depending on the business, ableism can actually work in your favor. Um, I, being a DEI speaker, a lot of people think that this is all you can do. This is all you can specialize in. And in fact, that actually is what sometimes gets you hired. Now, I don't like bias as much as anybody else, but I think that if I were to take the chance and be hired by those companies, be hired by those organizations, I could then prove them wrong when I come to speak with them in person. And so this lived experience of disability and this presentation of being a disabled person actually does work sometimes. And I think the best thing to do is to play with your strengths as a person with a disability. Play with your strengths, even if your strength is talking about that disability itself. It is a door opener sometimes. And so I think that using what you have can really just open doors for people with disabilities. Karoline?
So I want to say two things, and I totally agree. I've had similar experiences. The first thing is that, and maybe this is not the right attitude, but sometimes I feel resentful that I'm just about, going about my business and I am just about to go into a meeting or something, and I get stopped because somebody wants to talk about the dog, or they want to know, like, do I choose my own clothes, or some stupid, unrelated question. And I feel like, really, it's not my job to be the world educator on blindness today. Okay. And some days I have those days, and that's just being real. Even though my a lot of my speaking and a lot of the training I provide is disability awareness and DEI, you sometimes don't want to be in that role, right? Like when you're just trying to get somewhere, you're not into that. But as for being underestimated, that happens to me a lot more than I'd like to say. But my very favorite time was we were sitting in court. I was articling at the time, and the police were sitting on the other side of the courtroom, and I wasn't doing anything. I was just listening. And I actually heard the police talking about their plan for how they were going to present their case against our client. So I said to the people I was with that we needed to step out. And I, explained what the police were going to say and what they were going to present. And so when they presented it, there was no surprise. I took away the element of surprise because I was paying attention. I don't think that's disability specific, but I think my ability to listen is something that is a good tool, right? It's something I've worked on, and it's something that is useful in some cases. And as a mediator, it's a great tool when you're listening to people, when you feel them, and you can see what is going on with them, you're better able to solve or help them come to a solution.
Hmm. I love it. I love how you both complement, like your experiences are very different, but yet there is a complementing theme to it, and I really like that you are not occupying spaces with feelings of inferiority, thinking, oh, just because I have a disability, so I'm inferior. But I love that you are both women of power. You take up space and you still let your abilities lead. And I feel like a lot of people need to hear this. I want to go into a space where we really think about this entrepreneurship journey. While we have spoken about the challenges, but I feel like there's a specific area we need to talk about, the funding barriers, and just being able to access that capital to start a business. It's not an easy thing at all. And I know that prep meeting, Farrah, you did mention that you had started some type of I think, what was it, an incubation or something, but you couldn't get funding, and then you ended up moving over to DEI. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you were able to navigate that space, like the challenges in accessing funding, and how are you doing it now? Like, what's working for you?
Absolutely. So back in 2018, I entered a competition called Active Citizen Social Enterprise. And this was run by British Council Canada and the United Nations Association of Canada. I ended up winning a prize in that competition for the app idea I had that I mentioned before, pairing people who with disabilities with health mentors and with jobs as well, so that once they entered the job, they would be able to be tracked by a health mentor who could help them on a day-to-day basis or on a month-to-month basis, however they would prefer. So I won for the concept, and when I went to take it from ideation to delivery, I realized that I needed funding, and I would
Mhm.
apply to little different incubators or different meet with different mentors, people in enterprise fields to
Mhm.
get funding. And I found myself hitting wall after wall. The
Mhm.
first thing they said to me, well, one said to me was that, "Oh, am I able to handle this given the fact that my health takes me down sometimes?"
Mhm.
And I also had people saying, the type of concept you want to do, it's going to face some stigma, especially because there may be people who can do health apps quicker and faster than you can, because you're going from a more holistic type of view. And being somebody with a disability who also wants to pair other people with disabilities to create this app, it would just be a much longer process. At the end of the day, I ended up just shutting down that idea completely and decided, you know what needs to happen is people need to be educated about this before any type of business, such as the one that I tried to do, would really take off. And so I decided to go into DEI. And the first thing I did when I went into DEI was join a number of different councils, such as I was part of Health Canada's Patient Council for a number of years.
Mhm.
And that started me giving speeches, and it turned into a business. And the
Mhm.
good thing with having a business like this is that you don't really need a lot of funding to get you started. You don't need any at all if you're doing
Mhm.
it in a more independent contractor type of way. And so that's where I am now, and I feel it's what suits me for the moment.
I love that. I really love how creative you were and finding alternate strategies not to hold yourself back, but to really play on your strengths, like you mentioned earlier, and make sure that you do things that work for you. And it's sad that you couldn't get the funding that you needed, but it did redirect you to lean on your strengths, and you were able to now say, hey, I'm getting speaking engagements, I'm training. And you did an awesome job with our IDEA training in February in
Oh,
Toronto.
thank you.
So yes, thank you for that. So that's why we're happy to have you back again, Farah. Yes, and I just want to, I'm not sure, Caroline, if you are able to touch on this, but I want to talk about, because I do hear some of the women that I work with within this accessibility space, and some women with disabilities, they say, oh, it's really hard for me to say I have a business because that will also affect my benefits. So, to what extent does being self-employed almost kind of become a hindrance to you accessing your disability benefits? Or is there a positive way? Maybe you can just educate us all here to like, what has that looked like for you? Has that served you having a business? Has that served as you getting less benefits? Or maybe it has served that like there's no impact at all. You're just great.
So, from my perspective, when I was on ODSP, when I was in school, it was really hard to have any kind of income because every penny you made got deducted off of your Ontario benefits.
Mm,
So it was almost like a demotivator, if that makes sense to you.
okay.
And
Yes.
the day that I was able to say no thanks to ODSP and figure out my own way of doing things, I think was one of the happiest days of my life. It was a real freedom day. Um, because I think what happened was I actually, oh my God, yes, now I remember. I actually had a human rights case, and the winnings from that human rights settlement, I
Mhm.
used it to put into the beginnings of some of my business ideas.
Okay.
Um, and I have always had for me, this is what works, and it may not work for everyone else.
Mm,
So I'm just telling you my situation. I don't want to borrow for my business ever.
mm,
So everything in the business is paid for by the business. So um, and that's why it's very challenging because I just don't want to have anything to do with loans or anything like that. But
mm,
having the disability tax credit is a huge help because it reduces basically your taxable income at the end of the year. Um, and because I qualify for the disability tax credit, I also have a few extra benefits. So the medical expenses like my guide dog's food and her vet care, the taxes from that are deductible.
mm,
So that's a bit helpful. But in my opinion, anyway, and in my experience, um, having disability benefits really was harmful, like the Ontario disability benefits.
mhm.
Um, so I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh no, that makes sense, and it's from your unique lived experience, and I appreciate you sharing that. Farah, I know that your business is like Caroline is well established. You are still like, growing your business. How has that been experience been for you?
The experience, do you mean in terms of with ODSP?
Yeah, like just juggling, managing like, okay, income, RDSB, I don't know if you're able to talk about it, but do you qualify for the disability tax credit? How has been your experiences when you think about, hey, I'm growing my business. Do I need to make so much money or do I need to keep my benefits? Like, how has that been for you?
Well, I'm like Caroline on that. I really ODSP can sometimes be a hindrance.
Mm,
And I find that it's better to be off ODSP than on ODSP in many cases.
mm,
For myself, I have a very heavy amount of prescription drugs that I have to pay for every year. That equals 10 to 15 grand, depending on how much I'm on and which drug I'm on.
mm,
And when you make a certain amount of money on ODSP, as Caroline says, they will just subtract a large amount in order to give you the benefit of having ODSP. And because of that, as Karoline says again, it can be a demotivator because every time you make a dollar, even if it helps you get known in the community for the business that you're running, it gets taken away from you in some form, whether it's in medical help or financial help. And so for me, I'm still in that process of what do I want here? I haven't qualified to make a large amount of money yet, but I think when I hit that point, going off ODSP is something that I would really consider very, very much. In terms of the disability tax credit, I have qualified for it in the past. It's now been taken away from me. But I would say for anybody who is disabled who really wants to look into the disability tax credit and what it can provide for you, to contact the CRA, to call up the Ontario helplines and be able to learn a bit more about it before you enter into any sort of disability help.
Thank you for those insights. Truly appreciate. Thank you, Bob. I'm sure someone would find this helpful because you are very elaborate, at least in your experiences. I'm trying to just like, digest all of this information and just realize that, wow, we have a lot of work to do. And like Karoline once said, we have to have solution-driven conversations, right? How can we approach, how can we ensure that this entrepreneurship ecosystem becomes more inclusive, more accessible funding? What are the practical steps that you think incubators, investors, and policymakers can take to create more equitable and accessible spaces and funding opportunities?
So I think one of the things that is needed, and I don't have the answer to this, is we need to sit down with people from government to find out what programs are available and how can they be accessed by everyone. One of the problems with accessing government programs is that they are often paper heavy, so accessibility not existent already. And there are tons of conditions and it's very challenging. So that's one route that at some point we're going to have to go and take a look and see. Somebody has to, find out what's available now. The other piece of it is to work with the private sector to find out if we can access angel investors. But I don't like it in the standard way because of just what Farrah talked about, where, you need to have certain amount of hours of work, where it's not so flexible so that you're not taking care of yourself. Because one of the reasons we go into business for ourselves is so that we can take control of our lives and live better and more healthy lives, and more enjoyable lives. And I think, the whole model, the basically the male model of doing business, which is where you work, 80 hours a week, I think that needs to go away. And I think more collaborative, more partnerships is the way to go. And I think that's how we're going to find solutions for everyone. And I think conversations like this are good starts. More networking. I love networking, and I think the more we talk to each other, the more we'll learn that there are things we don't even know about.
Absolutely. I love your ideas. I love how you even elaborated on the fact that we do need community. Networking is what gives you access to resources, right? Yes. So, and also the part where you say the government has to maybe make it clear what's available, what's not available, so that people are not so much discouraged to start their own businesses, right? So Thank you so much for your insights, Caroline. And Farrah, would you like to add on to this? What are the most urgent needs? What do you think that can be done to make sure that, they are more equitable and accessible funding opportunities?
Absolutely. So I think to start, before we even get into the equitable funding, um, we want to get people prepared, whether they're disabled or they're not disabled. And by that, I mean that when a lot of angel investors take a look at an entrepreneur or a possible entrepreneur, they wonder, what am I betting on? What kind of person is this? And what proof of concept do they have that I'd be able to say, you know what, this is a really great concept, let's just run with it. And I think the problem is that a lot of competitions, a lot of contests, a lot of accelerators are geared towards youth. I am a woman in my 30s, so I've aged out of a lot of this. I used to enter a lot of these contests and a lot of these accelerators between the ages of 18 to 30, because that's what the Canadian government tends to focus on in terms of funding. But once you're out of that realm, it becomes quite difficult to approach these sort of investors and say, hey, you know what? I don't actually have any proof of concept. Um, I have a really great plan, but sometimes it's just not enough for them, as bad as that may sound. Um, and so becoming more inclusive involved in doing a lot of contests, right? Doing a lot of accelerators that are open to the 30 plus. Besides that, we want to create inclusive media systems to promote people with disabilities that don't shadow ban disability creators. That can happen on various social media platforms. And finally, when it comes to funding, we want people to understand that, as Caroline says, a lot of us do not want to work that 60, 80-hour week. We want to have co-owners and we want to be supported by our community. There's a really great quote by the activist Grace Lee Boggs, and she says, movements are born of critical connections rather than critical mass. And so when you actually are able to connect with people on a person to person basis and say, hey, this is what my knowledge is because I've been in a contest. This is what my knowledge is because I have all these connections. Then you're able to find more people who are willing to take a bet on you.
Can I add something to that, Farrah? And
Hmm.
I think it's something that I should have added. Um, we also need some training for particularly the women with disabilities on how to present yourself. How do you network? How do you show up? What do you do to make yourself stand out? How do you speak to people? Because we've been shut out of so much that we don't have those skills. They're not necessarily ones that we are born with, those are learned. And I think more resources need to be put into providing women with the skills to do those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And you just gave me an idea, Caroline, for our mentorship hub. We are having workshops to help the women with disabilities in our mentorship hub, employment workshop, leadership skills development. So I will make sure that we include things like that, like networking, showing our public speaking, so that at least we know that we are doing our part. But I believe on a bigger scale, this should be out there, even government-funded initiatives that help build women with disabilities skills to know how to show up in spaces and be their best version and not shrink, right? So these have been like amazing, incredible reflections and conversations. And I thank both of you just for being so authentic, for being so driven, driven not only for yourselves, but driven to also change lives. And that brings us to the end of today's conversation. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Farrah and Caroline, for being here. Um, And to everybody that has tuned in or will tune in, you will watch this as a recorded video. Thank you for even being part of this movement towards accessibility, equity, and empowerment for women with disabilities. So let's continue to keep the momentum going. Just not today, but making sure that we do this every day. But before we close, I would like to just have one word of encouragement from our guest today. So I'll start with you, Karoline. What is one word of encouragement and mantra that helps you get from one day to the other, or your favorite quote that you would like to leave with our audience today?
So lately, what I've been working on for myself is that I can take up space, or I will take up space, and that has been my mantra for the last few weeks. So I'll stick with that.
Awesome. Yes, I will take up space. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. On to you, Farrah.
Yes, I think I'll just end with a quote from one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing.
Absolutely. That's my favorite quote too. So thank you. I will take up space. And yes, thank you. Thank you both. And thank you to our audience. This was amazing. Happy National Accessibility Week. Let's continue to make impact, not only in this week. Let's continue these conversations in every space that we occupy so that we can make sure that women with disabilities are empowered or feel that they can take up space without us having to promote ableism, and ensuring that every space that we occupy is safe for everybody in spite of gender or disability. So yes, we end it right here. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. All right. Okay.